So I started working at the farm maybe towards June. I started being on the farm more. June, July, August, I'm at the farm like every day. And then the farm is really transforming me in a way that is hard to explain. Being on the land, hands in the soil, working, sweat, performing the rituals of weeding and hoeing and, communicating with the birds and the plants and the bees, something started to happen with my grief where it wasn't that I was like exploding anymore or even imploding, but my grief was going somewhere. It was going into the land, and the land was filling me back up.
You're now listening to In Praxis, a podcast from the Praxis Project created to support, hear from, and uplift the stories coming out of the ecosystem of base building organizing. An ecosystem that includes frontline groups building community power and the folks who help support their important work. In Season 3, our host, Blair Franklin, is exploring community-driven strategies for food justice. Our guests are incredible community organizers working to advance fair farming practices, community-led urban farming, and equitable food procurement and retail. These are their stories about how we feed our communities with healthy, culturally appropriate, fair, and affordable food, and build community power to advance health equity through food justice.
Awesome. Ashley, I am so excited to connect with you today and just really hear more about you and your work with Land Based Jawns. And yeah, just a big fan of your work, website, just really phenomenal. So I would just love for you to tell us a little bit more about who you are and what the work you do is with Land Based Jawns.
Well, thank you for having me, Blair. I've been following the Praxis Project for a minute and have been using a lot of the work that y'all put out to inform the work that we do at Land Based Jawns and stuff. So I just want to say thank you for having me. A little bit about me. So yes, my name is Ashley Gripper. I'm the daughter of Dawn Kipkin and Paul Gripper III. Both my parents have transitioned to ancestors, and they're a big part of who I am. They're a part of the work I do. They're an influence to the scholarship I produce. And yes, just important for me to name them and bring them into the spaces with me to really honor them in their lives. I'm from Philly, born and raised. I live here currently. And a lot of the work that I do, both in the academic space, in the activist space, and in the advocacy space, is really around Philly's urban agriculture movement. It's around spirituality and healing that is facilitated through the land and connecting to the land and earth. And as you know, I just finished my PhD in environmental.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I finished it on Monday. This past Monday, April 11, 2022, which is actually the 2-year anniversary of my dad's transition. So that day was really meaningful for me. And I was, my committee was giving me a little bit of grief. They was like, we don't know if you could do it by then. I was like, listen, I done told y'all what this day means to me. Like, my dad wanted this PhD for me more than I wanted it for myself. So like, I want to give him the gift of getting it on the day that he transitioned. So I did it. I made it. I pushed through, got them letters, and now I'm out. I'm transitioning out of Harvard and to Drexel in the fall, and also co-running, co-figuring out, co-creating an organization called Land Based Jawns, which is dedicated to offering workshops, education and training to Black folks in Philly around land-based living, around agriculture, around carpentry, and also safety and self-defense, all with this lens and perspective of like prioritizing self and community healing. So that organization will be 2 years old in August. And I mentioned earlier that Praxis Project has also informed, some of the work that I do. I remember reading, I think it was Praxis Project that had put out different models of leadership And so like I'm in meetings with people who really want to be a part of the work and help build out what we do in the city to figure out how to transition into like a shared leadership model.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I don't want to be holding all the work, and it's a lot. And also, it's a lot for one person to hold. There's so much more richer ideas and, work that comes out of it being shared. In so many of the spaces I'm in, we either have started out as a shared structure or are transitioning into a shared structure. And it just comes up for me over and over again that the work is so much richer and better when it's done in community and it's done with other people. So, Land Based Jawns has a lot of exciting things coming down the pike this year. We're doing the Earthseed Skillshare again. So the Earthseed Skillshare we did a couple years ago or last year, and we're doing it again in the fall. We're doing some international Black food justice stuff. Just got a lot of exciting things happening, and a lot of people who are interested in, reclaiming, Black people specifically interested in reclaiming their ancestral roots in agriculture and food. And I'm excited to help facilitate that for folks.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a little bit about me.
Okay. Whew, wow. Just so much that you shared and dropped in that intro. And I mean, just first and foremost, congratulations for
Thank you.
that PhD. That is a massive, massive, massive thing to get to. I'm very well aware of, both the success and power that you were able to cultivate and access into moving into that space, and also, just like the pain of moving through that space as well. And so, just lots of gratitude for you and your work. And thank you also for just bringing us in with ancestors and talking about, just both of your parents and the dates of the PhD being awarded, being that date of your father's transition, and just rooting us in the purpose of why you're here, but then also how that really connects to the larger work of Land Based Jawns and the ways in which you're really trying to connect Black folks back to land, food, and power. So just so much richness. Thank you so, so much. And there's 1,000 different directions we can go in this conversation. I feel like it would be great to start with what led you to doing food justice work? What got you inspired to be in it and do what you're doing right now?
When you finish like a big thing in life, it kind of pushes you to reflect. So many different things that have led you to that moment. So I've been in a serious state of reflection this past couple of weeks. And one of the things that pops up for me is like all of the people who really came and got me. My mom passed my senior year of undergrad. So that was 2011, almost 11 years ago. And I remember after she passed, I was working at a loft. I don't know, an Ann Taylor loft down in University City. I had graduated and I was looking for other little jobs. I was like, I want to do something where I could use my sociology degree. You know how it is when you first graduate high school or college. You're like, what do I do next? So I remember one day I was working at the loft and this woman comes in with her friends, 2 Black women. They shopping around, laughing, kikiing. It's so cute. And we started talking somehow. She asked me my advice on something she was trying to buy and wear. And I was like, yeah, that's cute, blah, blah, blah. So then next thing you know, I'm ringing her up and she's asking me about myself and my life. I was like, yeah, I studied abroad my first year. And she was like, oh my gosh. Then I told her I graduated with a degree in sociology. And she was like, oh my God, that's what I studied in college. So then she out of nowhere is like, listen, I don't know if this is appropriate, but are you looking for a job? I was like,
yes.
And she was like, okay. I just started working at this organization right behind here called the Urban Nutrition Initiative. And, let's keep talking. So months go by, we back and forth, trying to coordinate something. And then maybe like 3 months later, she and I finally meet in person and like sit down, have an interview. And she basically is like, I want to bring you in. That was my first job, other than a loft. That was my first job out of college, was working at the Urban Nutrition Initiative, which is this kind of nonprofit organization attached to the University of Pennsylvania's Netter Center for Community Partnerships. There were a lot of issues with the organization, but that was my introduction to food work, is working in that space. That's kind of where I learned about food justice. I learned more about the food system and the intersections of the food system. But I don't think that I started developing a true passion until I went to the Black Farmers and Urban Growers Conference.
Mm,
So I started at Urban Nutrition in 2012. And then in 2013, I went to the Black Farmers and Urban Growers Conference just because I was interested. I was like, I want to learn, I want to experience, I want to, get to know more about this work, especially within the context of like Black agriculture. So
mm,
I went to the conference, and that year, I don't know if you know, Dr. Monica White was the keynote speaker.
mhm,
Monica has since wrote Freedom Farmers, Agricultural Resistance, and the Black Freedom Movement. But at the time, she was just starting to put the seeds out there for the book. And as she was giving this keynote, she was talking about Black farming cooperatives in the South. She was talking about Black people growing in cities. And she was drawing the connections and the parallels between the South and us in cities. And then also the way she articulated it and like really just was telling a story. The way she did that was the first time I was able to see food like as the pathway to liberation for Black people.
mm, mm,
It was mind blowing. It was world opening. It was such a transformative moment for me because she was also doing it kind of within an academic space. And at the time, I was like, should I go back to grad school? I don't know. I really like statistics. I want to do public health. I was like having all of these questions. I really think she kind of provided me with a roadmap for how this work can happen in multiple spaces. So
mhm.
that's where I like to say, like, my passion for food justice, for Black ag, that's where that was really cultivated. It was from that conference.
Wow. Yeah. Just what comes up for me, I think, in your retelling of that is the power of one, both like being seen and witnessed by
Mm-hmm.
people in community, by our elders, by folks that like just see the power and potential in us, right? And just what meeting those Black women at the loft did for you and
Mm-hmm.
kind of catapult you into this whole field of work, and then that just being reinforced by Dr. Monica Wright's work and just,
Yes.
yeah, taking you on this entire journey. The power of being seen and seeing your power and potential.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me tell you how this is even more like exactly what you described.
Mm,
So I heard Monica for the first time in 2013, but I was little old me still trying to figure out who I was. I think I was
mm,
like 22. Then eventually I did go back to school. And then eventually I went back to more school. I did a master's and then a PhD. And then I went to the Black Farmers Conference in 2018. And
mm,
again, Monica was the keynote speaker 5 years later. And
mm,
this was when it was in North Carolina and her book had already come out. And she was basically telling everybody, like, y'all gave me the blessing to write this book 5 years ago. Now here I am with this book written. Basically, this is my offering to my community.
mm.
So at that moment, I was like, oh, girl, you got to go talk to her because, like, she really is the reason that you went down this path. So I went up to her and I told her exactly what I told you. I was like, I heard you speak 5 years ago. That's the reason I went back to school. Now I'm at Harvard trying to figure out my life. I would love if we could build some sort of relationship, if you consider being on my committee, if you want to keynote this conference we about to do. We have such a beautiful relationship now. She was one of my committee members. It's weird to say was and not is, but it just was because I'm done. But she was one of my committee members. So she was at my defense on Monday. She,
Mm,
asked me
mm,
beautiful questions. She asked about Land Based Jawns. She was the only committee member who did. When we talk about Black women and Black elders in our life seeing us, Monica really saw me. Not only did she see me, but she made space to hold me through all of the challenges that I was going through in that program. And, it's really like, a testament of the power of community and Black love, Black platonic love, Black elderly love for the young folks and for the generations coming after them. And I just really appreciate the way that these people have really kind of came and got me in the physical absence of my parents.
yeah. Whew. The words you're saying, they just feel like medicine around the
Mm,
ways in which Black folk, Black love really can liberate us, and just
yes.
hearing the ways in which you're talking about Dr. Wright and the journey that you're on right now is, yeah, just so powerful. So thank you for like such a thoughtful, deep, personal storytelling to really get us started in this conversation. I think that was just so beautiful. It's a beautiful invitation to that medicine that you've provided to all of us. So You went to the conference for 2 years, heard Dr. Monica Wright speak twice, really got connected to her in a deeper way. And of course, she was the only one that asked about Land Based Jawns. So I would love to hear talking a little bit more about that work, which started, I guess you said, about 2 years ago. So can you talk more
Mm-hmm.
about the work of Land Based Jawns? When you started it, what was happening in community? What did the food landscape look like in community? And why did it lead you to want to build out Land Based Jawns in Philly?
Mm-hmm. Just another story.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
For people who don't know, I said I'm from Philly. Jawns is a Philly word, and it can mean whatever you want it to mean. So when I was growing up, Jawns was like, oh, you a Jawn, like these Jawns, everything's Jawns. So land-based Jawns just referred to Philly folks, particularly Black Philly women, Black folks, trans folks, who at least want to be land-based, right? Want to cultivate a deeper relationship with the land. And so for me, growing up in Philly, I didn't really have a lot of access to like nature or green space. And, everything around me was really concrete. And I recall one of my earliest experiences being outdoors in nature, the woods, being when I was a Girl Scout. And they took us on some trip. And I remember we wasn't even sleeping in tents. We was in some like half tent, half cabin situation. And I just was freaking out. I was so scared because it was cobwebs and spiders and I couldn't really sleep. And I think about that experience and I'm like, dang, being in Philly is kind of hard to connect in those ways if you don't have the opportunities to really like get out there or have people to show you how to be outside. So, that's kind of in the back of my head, but the kind of culmination of founding this organization happened, I want to say, starting December 2019. I was attending a church. I still attend this church in Boston called New Roots AME. And the pastor is Reverend Mariama White Hammond. She's an ecological justice minister. She had the church do a congregation-wide read a parable of the sower. So this was in December 2019. So I read this book in like January, finish it in February, and I'm like, oh shoot, this book is wild. Mind you, now it's January, February 2020. So I remember coming home from spring break, and that was around the time that stuff was in the air and they was like, oh, y'all might stay home. Don't come back to school after spring break. And I was like, yo, what's happening? So, I just read Parable of the Sower. Stuff is happening with COVID and we don't really know. And I'm sitting here thinking like, yo, this is wild. Like, I don't know. I feel like we should have some sort of safety plans in place. So I will say early on after I read Parable of the Sower, I was definitely in kind of like a survivalist mode. So then that's March. And then April, end of March, my dad kind of gets sick and we thought everything was going to be fine. We had good information from the hospital. He gets discharged from the hotel with like no real care plan, with no support. My dad had been houseless for a long time. And thankfully at the time he had an apartment, but he didn't really have furniture. We couldn't afford stuff. So, I started a whole campaign to help get him like this special chair he needed to lift his legs up, all this stuff. So then April, 11th, my dad unexpectedly passes away. So that's happening at the same time as the pandemic is happening. And I'm trying to process grief and angry and mad and frustrated at the world. And at the same time, afraid of the pandemic and what's happening. And then fast forward a little bit to May, and then George Floyd is murdered. And then we have these onsets of protests across the world, but especially across the country, across the city. And there's just so much happening at this time. And then at the same time, my dear sister friend, Chef Laquanda Dobson, hits me up and is like, yo, sis, come be on the land with us. She's a farmer. She farms at Sankofa Community Farm. And she called me out to the farm. So I started working at the farm maybe towards June. I started being on the farm more. June, July, August, I'm at the farm like every day. And then the farm is really transforming me in a way that is hard to explain. Being on the land, hands in the soil, working, sweat, performing the rituals of weeding and hoeing and, communicating with the birds and the plants and the bees. Something started to happen with my grief where it wasn't that I was like exploding anymore or even imploding, but my grief was going somewhere. It was going into the land, and the land was filling me back up. So, I'm having this experience at the same time as the world is really like everything is shaky. And then also I'm reading Parable of the Talents. Parable of the Talents, I think, is what did it for me. Parable of the Sower, there's kind of like statewide collapse. And then Parable of the Talents is really hard in the beginning, but then you see how they rebuild community, how they get in touch with the land, the processes of honoring the people who have passed. I feel like Parable of the Talents kind of really provided a roadmap for what that could look like for us. So all of these things happening at the same time. And then at the same time, I also started learning how to use firearms, how to handle them safely. So I'm doing all of this, and then I'm sharing it on social media, and people keep asking me about it. And I'm like, oh, it's a lot of people who want to know how to safely handle firearms. It's a lot of people who want to get connected to the land and learn how to grow their own food and be self-reliant. It's a lot of people who are grieving and don't know what to do with their grief. And so I'm sitting here like, this is stirring. It's stirring. And I talked to a few of the people who popped up on my heart, some land farmer friends. And I was like, I would love for us to consider doing this thing together. And that's when I offered the idea of Land Based Jawns. And they were all so excited. But the way things were working is that both of them didn't have the capacity. They were burnt out. And I had the capacity because I wasn't doing school. I said, whatever, I need a break. So I was like, okay, y'all, what if I just, work on getting this thing started, and then y'all can come in when y'all are ready. And they were like, yes, go for it. So that's kind of the origin story of Land Based Jawns. I started playing with the ideas and looking at Parable of the Talents and Parable of the Sower as a roadmap. I was like, what are the skills that Octavia Butler highlighted in these books as being essential to not only surviving, but also thriving and rebuilding? So then for me, being on the land myself, I started to transition from this survivalist mentality into a land-based living mentality. So that's the difference, being survivalism, which, for some people who are in really dire situations is a reality. The culture of survivalism is definitely rooted in Eurocentric values and individualist values. So I'm like, what would a more African-based or Afrocentric understanding of this be? And as I'm learning from the people who are teaching me how to farm, I'm like, oh, it's about community. It's about relationship. It's about living in connection with the land, not figuring out how to use the land and the earth for my gain, but actually, how do we support each other? How do we have that symbiotic process? So that's kind of when the reframing of survivalism turned into land-based living and land-based thriving. And, all of that happened within a very short span of time, like a matter of like 8 months. And that really was the foundation for Land Based Jawns. I feel like I'm been talking and talking and talking. You can interrupt me if I'm talking too much.
And you're 100% fine, great, perfect. And I think because part of what really connects folks to the meaning of food justice work, land work, community work, right, is through the power of story. And so I think just really telling the fullness of your story and how you came to where you are, again, just as one of the methods that we have access to in this podcast has really been illuminating ultimately the ways in which stories help folks to open their eyes and ears and bodies to food and land being part of the way that we'll liberate ourselves, right, and create more justice in the world. And so we'll never interrupt your story. I think it's important to hear the fullness of it. I really want to uplift pieces of it that I think were just so striking. So connecting back to New Roots AME and the Ecological Justice Minister talking about doing a community reader Parable of the Sower and the ways in which spirituality and activism intersected, which also feel deeply connected to the work of Land Based Jawns, right? And the same sort of connection between activism and spirituality, and the way in which going to the land for you and that invitation by LaQuanda really allowed you to process grief and really metabolize that in a different sort of way. And I just think about the ways in which I always tend to go to my garden and weed when I'm most stressed. That is always what I do to just get back in grounded and in touch with who I am, right? Is like going to the garden, going to the land and doing that work. And so just feeling a lot of connection to your words. And then ultimately, you know, moving from this really rooted in white dominant white supremacist culture of survivalism, but really recognizing that's not it. It really is land-based living, land-based thriving through community, relationship, and connection to land. And like that really being the thing that is kind of rooting you in this work with Land Based Jawns. And I really appreciate not only the connection between spirituality and land work, but also the ways in which you're really talking about like self-defense and safety and how that's connected to this work too, right? And so it just feels so comprehensive, which is just dope. So yeah, just again, deep gratitude and appreciation for you and your work. And I'm just curious how community has been engaged with Land Based Jawns. Like, how have you seen folks shifted or transformed or power built through the work that you're doing? Yeah, can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, you know, I didn't know how people was going to receive it. I knew that people was interested because they was hitting me up on my personal socials, but I submitted a little grant to the Philadelphia Food Justice Initiative that is partially city funding, but partially somewhat private funding. But the panel of people who make the selection are like Philly activists, organizers, you know, people who do work around food. And they funded it. And I was like, oh, shoot. Oh, y'all about it. And not only did they fund it, but they were really excited, enthusiastic about it. They're like, we haven't had any project come through like this and really wanted to support this work. So, you know, as I started to like sprinkle seeds out there and let people know, it grew like exponentially in terms of like the social media following, people wanting to be involved. And you know, people tell me I need to stop being surprised by stuff like this, but it was clear to me that there was a need that was beyond just urban agriculture. There's two things happening that I noticed in Philly, and probably I heard from other folks that it's across the country. There's urban agriculture from like an entrepreneurial perspective that is like growing food. I have a business. I'm trying to get paid and like whatever, that's cool. But there's also this other side that's more like we are about growing food for the spirituality practices it offers, for the community building it offers. There's somewhat of a divide. I don't want to say a divide, but what I've noticed is there's two camps. And what the response showed me that there was a gap. There was a need. There were people who wanted something deeper. People who didn't just want to learn how to grow their food, but they wanted to be connected to their food. They wanted to be connected to the earthworms and the, you know, all the microorganisms in the soil. They wanted to be connected to things on a deeper spiritual level. So starting out, we were like, okay, we have funding to have about 10 to 15 people for this skill share. But we, you know, it was the first one. So we're like, let's just do invitations. Almost like a trial or like
like a pilot or something maybe?
Pilot, yes. I knew it was like on the tip of my tongue. So we're like, okay, we got 6 spots to kind of like open up to the broader community and public. And for those 6 spots, for the first skill share, mind you, we didn't really have a website. I know you've seen the website, and the website is beautiful, but that website was non-existent when we was first putting it out there. And we had 40 people apply for 6 spots. So we were like, oh, shoot. Well, this is hard and sad because like we can't offer it to everybody because we just don't have space. So, you know, that was the first skill share. You know, we ended up having between 15 to 20 people, which is more than we had originally planned. And the response from those folks was incredible. So I told you I'm an environmental epidemiologist. So I had the surveys and stuff going on. I was like, we got to make sure we do the evaluation. And the responses just were so heartwarming and heartfelt. And I just like read it in amazement. And I was like, wow, this work is really touching people and it's really connecting with people. And what my hope was from the jump has been like, thinking like Earthseed, right? Thinking like the community of Earthseed in the Parable series is like, okay, you learn these skills, you share these skills. The people who learn those skills then go share their skills. And that's what was happening. It was like the Skillshare was then going to share with their networks. And it just was like this ripple effect. And that's the point. You know what I'm saying? Like, to me, that's how we get free. We don't hold these things and be like, we the only ones who could be the keeper of this. No, if we hoping that everybody get free and everybody heals, from the grief, the trauma, all of the things they're going through, then we got to continue to share and share and share and share. And that's really what happened. And, and today I told it's grown beyond what I could imagine. And there's mad people who like, I want to be involved in little capacity. I want to be involved in a big capacity. And that's why we get to go through this awesome process of like transitioning into like figuring out how do we share the load and share the leadership of this organization so that we are limiting the amount of like blind spot or like people are not falling through the cracks, right? Like, so my homie Maika is like, I work at the library, I work at 6 and Lehigh. So, where I'm at, it's a lot of people who are houseless, who sleep on the streets. It's a lot of people who are using substances. She was like, those are the people that, I want to make sure that we get in programs and projects too. So that's what I mean. Like our team, the way it's forming so beautifully, it's like, we're trying to keep in mind all of the different things, all of the different people that we need to care for through this work. So that's what it's been like. The way it works is like these kind of 5 workshops that happen over the course of like 5 different weekends. So the first was Land is at the Center. And that was a intergenerational panel of 4 Black women, the youngest 16, the oldest 70 plus, all from Philly too, talking about their experiences with growing food and connecting to the land, the historical roots in agriculture, all of that. So that was a webinar that was open to the public. And we had, I think, 120 people on the webinar. Mind you, this was the first event we did, period. And I was like, oh, shoot, it's a lot of people. And all of the people on that webinar were from Philly. Well, I don't know. I guess there's some people I don't know. But a lot of them was from Philly because a lot of them I recognize their names. And then the second part of the series was safety and self-defense. So I've since become a certified firearms instructor. So that workshop was actually 3 parts. We had a first portion that was really focused on somatic therapy because we wanted people to understand the connections between mind and body. So that workshop was called Body Mind Centering, and it was about, okay, when you're in a situation, a defensive situation, what's happening between your brain and your body physiologically, and how do we understand and regulate what's happening so that we can respond? And then that was followed by more combat-based workshops. So we had an instructor come in and tell us, like, if somebody grabs you, here's some techniques to like get out of that situation. And then the third portion of that was I did an intro to pistol lesson and conflict avoidance. So we talked about the basics, and we went to a range together and we learned how to, do certain things together. So that was the second part of the series. The third was gardening and growing. So we had an introduction to gardening. We started a community garden together. And then we followed it with a radical self-forgiveness workshop. Then we had building and rebuilding. So we had a whole carpentry workshop, learn how to use power tools, build raised beds. And then we had the rebuilding portion was a panel of organizers, Katrina Baxter and Blue Kind, talking about what it means to rebuild community. What are the practices of building relationships and building deeper community? And then the last workshop was to tie it all together. And that was land-based living. Pretty much all people from Philly who were in the cohort. Yeah. A lot of them had never camped before, never slept outside before. So we slept outside at Bartram's Garden in Southwest Philly. So we set up tents out there. We learned how to start fires together. We cooked outside on burners. And we also had an herbalism portion where we were learning how to make medicinal salves, for muscle tension and stuff like that. So that kind of tied everything that we had been learning together. Okay, we learned the building, we learned the gardening, we learned the safety. How do we learn how to put it all together and thrive on the land? So it was a beautiful, beautiful time, like, around the fire, playing drums, singing songs, praying, crying, everything. So that's the skill share. And this year we're doing it in the fall.
Wow. Again, just feeling so grateful for all that you're doing and offering and the role that you're playing right now, the way that you're sharing your story. So again, just keep coming back to, well, one, that Skillshare series, absolutely beautiful. It really is not just about skills as it relates to the land, as it relates to food, as it relates to our like growing, but relating to like our mind, body, spiritual health, relating to the ways we forgive ourselves, the ways we lean into new experiences together and get held through that process. And really, looping back around to aiming like spirituality, community building, and practice and skill sharing, like being those kind of formative pieces that really are helping to just bring folks in and really keep folks connected to land, to their food, to their bodies, to their spirits, to their minds. So yeah, I'm just like, whew. Okay. So, Ashley, I would just love to hear. I mean, you talked about like the power of what you're doing, the work and bringing the people together. What are some of the barriers you're experiencing in doing this work right now?
The biggest one that comes to mind is around land. The city that is rapidly gentrifying, people are being displaced, and the cost of land has went up into the sky. So I remember looking at lots, the vacant lot that we kind of transformed into a garden last year. When I first was looking at it, I think it was like 15 or 20,000. Now it's like over 30, 40,000. And that's in a neighborhood that is not really gentrifying yet. So then I look around, I have some ideas of places, and then people have shared, oh, I think we should go here. I think we should go here. The cost of that land is like 200,000-300,000. It's because like what's happening is that there are a lot of developers coming in, or people with money, business owners, whatever, buying up land and sitting on it, waiting for neighborhoods to change so that they can then sell it and make a profit. So that's making it really hard for us to anchor a home location for LBJ in the communities that we want to, because, a lot of the places we're looking at, like West Philly, trying to preserve parts of the Black Bottom, and it's such a barrier right now because the costs are so high, and it's just like outside of the budget that we have. The other thing is that we actually got money. We got a grant to actually purchase land. Even still with that $100,000 grant, land alone is like 150, 200. So it's just, that's a big barrier, not just for us. I know that's true for growers across the city. It's happening, far and wide. And, land security, land tenure is something that there are people working on, namely soil generations. And we've been designing the city's first urban agriculture plan in collaboration with a urban planning studio. We're making a lot of recommendations around land, but the other barrier related to land is that Philly is a city where the city council has a lot of decision-making power over land sales in their districts. So that means if you have city council members who are corrupt or who'd rather appease developers, then you're not really going to be able to contend with those developers when it comes down to purchasing land. Like, there's so many issues with it. We're trying to make recommendations to the city, like implement this so that it can help growers, get and keep land. But who knows if the city will actually implement this thing. That's definitely the top barrier. Yeah, honestly, that's the main one that comes to mind, because like everything else has been going so beautifully. And like, I just truly feel like this project is blessed. And my therapist always says, like, this is needed. This is why the universe is making, and the ancestors and the creator are making a way for this to happen, because it's necessary for our healing and our liberation. So, outside of the land thing, things have just been happening so beautifully. I mean, funding, of course, but funding has come. And this is a mentality I've adopted over the years. There's this big grant I was really hoping we got. And if the application was due on my dad's birthday, I was like, oh, this is meant to be, And then found out we didn't get it. And then I was like, okay, that means that wasn't meant for us. And whatever is meant for us is coming. Don't you know, a couple months later, somebody hit me up about a staff grant. So a staff grant is different from a regular grant because the staff is like highlighted your organization as one they want to fund, and it's non-competitive. The staff grant was for more money than the other grant that we didn't get. So that's what I mean by like, not getting hung up when doors close, because the right doors will open when they're meant to. So, our funding is a thing, but like, it's not something that I really get hung up on or worried about. The land thing is a bigger, more in my face thing. And I think that's something that I and the whole team need to practice, kind of trusting the process and trusting that what's meant to be will be.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard like that refrain so much from folks doing organizing work. Like the no that came actually led to like a bigger, more enthusiastic, more consensual yes, right? Like something that like felt like more right. And just again, like thank you for offering that example to us about both some of the barriers that are showing up in the work around access to land and gentrification, and so many ways in which neighborhoods in Philly are just Black folks in neighborhoods are being priced out of their own spaces. But also, some of the ways in which opportunity and hope still exists, right? And like the ways in which you're kind of seeing some of that come through with some of the work that you're doing. How do you measure success? And if you had unlimited resources, you can define that for yourself. What would you do to increase your impact?
How do we measure success? So to me, success is when my community, the Philly communities, the Black growing communities, are happy with the work that we do. When there's impact, that is that ripple effect that I talked about. Like that to me is like how my heart measures success. Now, how I have to measure success for the grants is something slightly different.
Right. That's a whole other conversation.
Right. And I think that kind of boils down to how you define success.
Yeah.
And that's something that I am challenging in other spaces too. I'll talk a little bit about. But in terms of grant funding grant metrics and evaluation metrics, to start, it was largely about like, what programs did you set out to provide? Did you provide them? How many people attended? For the Skillshare, they didn't require me to have surveys, but I was like, let's do this, because then that'll start to not only evaluate the program for the grant, the funders, but also for us. Are our workshops doing what we hoped they would do? So like that was a big part of it. There were people who gave us, a lot of positive feedback. There was constructive feedback, like, this was too long, blah, blah, this was too short. So that gives an idea of like programmatically if people are satisfied. Now, generally in food work, urban ag work, a lot of times funders, like large foundations, ask for like, did the fruit and vegetable intake of your participants increase? Or what were the changes in BMI? Things like that. So, I was from the jump very much pushing against that, but like they also didn't ask me for that. But one thing that I'm doing in my academic work that I presented on Monday is I've developed a scale to measure something called agricultural community power. And I did that because I had been hearing time and time again from organizations that the metrics don't align with their goals and their impacts, the metrics that the funders require. So, in school, I'm sitting here like, okay, how could I design a tool that was more in alignment with the impacts and goals of grassroots organizations? Through the last couple of years, I've been working to develop this scale, and it essentially, like I said, it measures agricultural community power, but within that, it captures collective self-determination. It captures Ubuntu and interdependence. It captures land-based spirituality, environmental health knowledge, and it also captures community care. So, a lot of the questions and items that went into that scale came part from Monica White's theoretical framework in Freedom Farmers. It came from these focus groups that I had with urban growers in Philly. It came from, my lived experience as a Black farmer, and also conversations that I had with other Black farmers about what the impacts are to them. So this tool is supposed to hopefully be more in alignment as an evaluation metric with like Land Based Jawns goals, for instance, than if, let's say, some large foundation was like, or the USDA was like, we want you to measure BMI. Then I could be like, no, actually, I'd rather use this tool, this instrument. So that's kind of how I'm hoping to measure in the future. The scale is finished, but I do need to do a couple more tests to make sure it works in different communities. But yeah, so that's a little bit about how we measure success and impact. What was the second question? I've been talking a minute. I forgot.
No, that's great. I want to actually pause for a second, because what you shared was just major. It's like just major. And I make sure to share information about how folks can contact you toward the end of this conversation, because that scale is so necessary and it transforms the game. So I just am like, please, please, please make sure you let folks know how to find you, where to find you. So when it feels finished and when it feels ready for community participation, sharing, whatever that looks like for you, I would love to make sure folks know about it. So yeah, I just wanted to say, whoa, that is huge. That's so dope.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then the second part of the question was just, if you had unlimited resources, how would you do to increase your impact?
Limited or unlimited?
Unlimited.
Ooh, unlimited. Okay, wait, first, so I need to do another round of pilot tests. had a little bit of overrepresentation of white people. So now the second round, I'm doing the pilot test only among Black, brown, indigenous folk, you know, just to make sure, like, all right, is it the same? Does it end up slightly different in a different population? Not a different population, because we definitely had Black, brown, indigenous people in the survey, but I want to have more of a representation of our folks. So I'm hoping to have that done like around early next year, like January, February. And at that point, I'll be at Drexel. So if you just like Google my name and then type Drexel, an email should pop up. But yeah, unlimited resources. So one of the main hopes from the jump has always been to have land that is out a little bit outside of the city. That's like 10 to 20 acres, to have people come from Philly to do this skill share. We don't have to worry about some of the things that we have to worry about in the city. So we could do, you know, safety and self-defense on the land, and also do growing and gardening, carpentry, do all of the workshops on the land at multiple times of the year. That would run us a couple $1 million just probably to purchase land. And then honestly, like, there's so much demand and like need for this work that funding is a big need, because that way people could dedicate more time. We could bring in folks to do the healing workshops. We could do the firearms workshop. We could do all of these things more frequently throughout the year instead of just one skill share. If there were unlimited resources available to Land Based Jawns, we would be doing this work around the clock. So, you know, I mean, obviously with rest is so important, but we would be doing this work, you know, so that people could get the skills that they wanted and they needed, and be able to have land outside the city as a kind of refuge and healing space, but also have an anchor in the city for folks who can't get to that space outside.
Yes. And we are going to put energy, manifestation, spirit behind that ask, because it is necessary for Philly and for all of us. So Ashley, I just want to say thank you so much for all the wisdom you shared with us today, and just the deep personal storytelling and sharing, and just the incredible work, the skill sharing, the connect folks back to land, Black folks in Philly. That is so incredible. Just want to thank you so much.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure to be here and in the chat. You know, like, I thank you for the platform to allow me to share about my parents and share a little bit about my journey and the work that Land Based Jawns is doing. This is important, and I think this is how the resources and the skills and the knowledge get shared, is through platforms like this. So I really appreciate you, Blair.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of In Praxis. We hope you all enjoyed it. Make sure to visit our website, www.thepraxisproject.org, where you can check out additional episodes with other guests, as well as learn more about our work.